Alright, how's it going, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Dyson Sphere Program. Hope you guys have been enjoying the series so far. If you guys have, know what to do, smash the like button if you haven't already, and consider subscribing. Turn the little bell notification icon on just so you don't miss out on any future posts or videos and all those fun things. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, either about this series or another series I'm doing, always leave those down below. And with that, let's get to today's episode. So as always, we're going to go ahead and continue on our factory remodel and kind of work towards that, end goal. So my goal really for today is to just set up a lot of the things we need set up for to get science going again, right? Because right now science is just, I don't know, it's been driving me insane that we're so close yet, honestly. Still so unprepared to get it going again. So I'm really just going through making sure, okay, well, let's go ahead and get what we can copied and just set up more or less, getting every little bit we can, because really a lot of the factory, like a lot of these little builds that I'm working on are just stuck because I'm missing one or two components that are primarily driven from the chemical area that we just haven't really touched in a few episodes. And I think a lot of that is coming down to just oil, like oil in general. We haven't touched the oil rebuild or oil 3.0 at this point in several episodes, honestly, because I know we had the original build, which is still standing, it's still functioning, so it is giving us a little bit of oil, but not nearly enough to sustain the entire factory. And then I know we did oil 2.0, which was just kind of an expansion, and it was going to be the long-term goal until I realized that it was going to be woefully inadequate, both in its throughput on a belt, because I had no compression in it, and also just the fact that it was entirely the wrong design I was trying to go for, just because I would have had, it just would have been a mess. I would have had to have had way more oil refineries than necessary. Plus I would have had to have dealt with just the coal, and I'd rather have to just import oil and then deal with that, because the worst case, I get a bunch of fuel oil, which I can use, and that's the main thing we want, and then the hydrogen, if we ever end up with too much, I can just burn off excess, right? Whereas the other unfortunate consequence is I would have to constantly be mining coal, and I don't want to have to constantly be expanding that. Although, yes, I'll have to do something similar with oil. I won't have to do it to the same degree that we've been having to do, so I'm not really too worried about it overall. So now we're going to go ahead and really just take a look at what is left of the kind of chemical plant slash I guess liquid area. I don't really know what to call this place other than just kind of a chemical land. So here I'm just clearing up pretty much all the old builds we no longer need, and just so I can make space, because I'm kind of just at the point where I'm like ready to, get everything turned back on for science and get everything just functioning all over again. But in order to do that, we need to make room. And so it's just, I also want to get access to these oil wells, because I believe there's this one and there's another one just to the right on the other side of the plastic build we did. Which also, by the way, is still not on because it needs the oil. The fuel oil, which I don't really want to connect into what little bit we have right now. I want what little bit we have going to sulfuric acid, so that way we can keep the titanium alloy flowing in. Also, trying to just trace some of these belts was god-awful. Looking back on it, and I say looking back on it, but in the moment when I was trying to trace these routes, I was like, what was I doing with some of these squirrely shit? Because as you just saw, that oil line that I was looking at goes all over the place, when I probably could have made it a much simpler kind of run for it. And honestly, there were points when I was demolishing this, and I was like, I'm glad on one hand I'm getting rid of this, because it's it's necessary. I need to make room, but also too, I'm like completely over the fact that some of these designs were just atrocious the way I was running things. I mean, there's still going to be inefficiencies, and there's still going to be things that are going to look like dog shit, but you know what? I'm okay with that. We're making some improvements to the factory, and right now, to me, that's all that matters. We're kind of getting into that proper direction. I definitely think I'm going to have learned a lot from this factory, so whenever that new update comes out, I will be excited to hit the ground running. I think I'm going to go at this game a lot more with the kind of end game in mind versus the in the moment mindset, right? Because when I was first starting this factory or this playthrough, I definitely was going about it with the, okay, we just need to get things working now and we'll fix things later. But after I've pretty much done this, I think I'm really going to go at it, especially in the next playthrough and probably many more playthroughs, hopefully, as this game continues to get more updates, with very much the end game in mind and how can I make things future-proof, or at the very least to make sure that things are getting constructed in such a way that allows us to be able to scale them, be able to quickly kind of plug and play, dismantle, upgrade, that just kind of that sort of thing. I'm also learning a lot about kind of standardized blueprints or standardized formats when it comes to a layout of a particular build. For the most part, it looks like everything's the same. I still haven't really done any sort of like look through of a like blueprint build, or not blueprint build, but just like a blueprint book of like, oh, this is the most optimal way to build X item. Like, I haven't really found that. Unlike in Factorio, where that is very apparent to me, I haven't really seen that in this game. Now, I'm sure there are very straightforward or very complex ways of building a specific item. For instance, maybe oil refinement just has a very efficient like layout, or maybe I don't know. I'm sure there are pretty efficient layouts. I just haven't seen any. But then again, I also haven't really looked into it. Just from my own experience, I haven't seen anything that I could be like, oh yeah, if I tweak this in a particular orientation, I'll have a really high throughput or something. That might be the case in this game, but it also might just be that everything's laid out in such a very simple way that you don't need to have a really weird sort of blueprint to things, which I like. I like that it's simple in that regard, because it does allow you to get scalability where it doesn't necessarily have complexity at the micro level. You have complexity at the macro level, right? So your interstellar connections between planets and those types of things, that's where you get your complexity from. So here I'm just spacing out a bunch of things because I want to find out where we can put oil, or all the oil refineries, because as I found out, there's those different, so there's the grid on the ground, but I found that if you try to transition between two of the zones, it doesn't like the blueprints, because the way the buildings get closer together as they get more towards the poles and things, and it starts getting angry. It doesn't let you blueprint right on the like latitude line or whatever it is, or longitude, latitude, I don't know, whatever separates the big regions. You can kind of see it on the right hand side where those lines don't quite meet up. It won't let me blueprint past that if it's also in the same zone. I don't know if I show, I think I kind of showed that off here in a little bit, because I was curious about some of the spacing that I noticed. But I can try to finagle some of the builds that we were working on. I think the biggest thing is oil is going to need, I think it was what? I think I have it on one of my notes here. Oil needs 420. We need 420 refineries to produce enough of the oil that we need. And so that's going to be quite a lot of refineries, and especially just the size of them, but also the weird rectangular orientation. You only have inputs slash outputs on 3 of the sides, so one of the sides is completely useless, so we have to have a weird T-shape on it. It's definitely not the most optimized design, but we do have to come up with something, right? So here you see me making use of those blueprints we've already made previously, where this has 2-item input, and then I'm just using it to, of course, reproduce. And I was thinking, oh, you know, we'll put them next to each other, but then it took me a minute, but then I was like, you know what? No, we could just go ahead and stack them. There's no reason we can't. And this right here is where you can see that thing where I can blueprint it to the north of that line, I can blueprint it to the south of the yellow line, but I can't blueprint it on the yellow line, or have it kind of half and half. At least I haven't figured out a way how. The game doesn't like that. I think it's just because of the spacing the objects have between each other, and so it's like, we're just not going to deal with any weird things. Put it on one side, put it on the other, or build half on one side and then build the other half on the other, and then try to merge them together that way, which is a completely acceptable way of doing it, I suppose. We're definitely getting closer, though. I think as we get everything set up, once we get oil going, because I think right now our big hurdle is once we get oil turned back on, like to a production scale, because right now what little oil I have producing is honestly insignificant and probably won't run much. Although I think once I set enough of these micro builds up, I should be able to get a rough run from the oil depot, or the refined oil depot that we have going, to maybe kickstart things and get the factory crawling, at least. I'm not sure. We'll have to take a look at that in probably the next episode around. So here I'm just adjusting some of the belts and making sure everything gets connected back up properly, so that way we can make sure we have power, make sure that we have inputs. And again, I am not really connecting any of these items up just yet. I just want to make sure that they're ready, so that way once we do get their inputs made, we can go ahead and just connect things up and the factory will really start to come alive. I'll probably have to adjust our power input a little bit. I don't know if I'll have to add more reactors slash ray receivers, but for the most part everything seems to be stable on the power on this planet. I will probably have to head over to Beta Indy 1 and 2 and adjust those accordingly as well, both in power, but also to make sure that we're mining enough ore and that we haven't run out on any of the ore fields just yet. I don't think we have, but I'll definitely have to make sure that we check that next episode. And then I'll have to adjust to make sure that everything's pretty hunky-dory, if you will. So here's where I start to notice that disparity between the machines, and so I'm like, huh, it is the same length, it is the same spacing, but notice that slight adjustment. So I'm not touching anything on my keyboard, I'm just moving it, but as you get closer to that yellow line, it shrinks them closer, and I'm like, huh, well maybe they're off scale. But then I'm like, okay, let me put them down. And I'm like, no, they are correct. And so then I go ahead and put the blueprints that need to be here. Another thing that we're going to need is those graphene tubes. Carbon tubes? I think they're graphene tubes. Or graphite tubes. I just think of them as carbon nanotubes. That's basically what they are. Best part is stone is used in a very high demand. I believe it's used primarily in the sulfuric acid. So we are going to use pretty much all of that stone, but it is in our way. So now is where I'm like, okay, let's start to come up with some sort of functional build. So my original thought was to just place them all in a line and figure out how do we connect them. And so I'm like, okay, well, we have 3 lines, or 3 useful spaces, so I have to figure out, well, how many belts do we need? Well, one belt, as we know, eats 1,800 items per second. So then if I stacked it up to 4 times, we'd have 7,200 items per second on a single belt. And I'm like, okay. So we're going to need just shy of 12,000-ish items per second, or 12,000-ish oil, refined oil per second. So I'm thinking, okay, well, how did we do our original design? Well, we did basically on one side, to the left side of all the machines, we did the output for the oil, and then on the right side, we did all the hydrogen. I'm thinking, okay, well, how can we stack this? Because I felt like this was a design that I think we did pretty well for the initial concept, and I'm like, okay, well, let's come up with how we can design this so that it can work. And so I was thinking, okay, the only thing I don't like is, so although the belt says it can handle 1,800 items per second, right? If the length of belt is long enough, right, so that the travel time for a product to basically exit a build is of some distance, and I didn't do this calculation, this was just something that I'm thinking of now, but also while I was designing it, I did kind of have that, I thought, was if a build was long enough, how possible is it that your 1,800 items per second could be thrown off in that's under the assumption that the items can clear whatever build and get onto the main bus or main freeway or storage, wherever they're going, before the next cycle has completed, right? So how long would a build have to be for a cycle to basically happen a second time? It's kind of hard to think about, but can I have a belt be too long and that it throws off the items per second effectively, is what I'm thinking of. I'm not sure. It might. It potentially, I suppose. If I find things bottlenecking anywhere, then I'll adjust the build. I'll just probably cut it in half or something and adjust that way. Because right now my only thought is it possible for something at the end of the build to travel all the way to this side? Because I believe it's going to be basically 120 machines long. So would it be possible for machine 120 to run a cycle, but then machine 1 to have run 2 cycles in the time it takes for machine 120 to get its products all the way down to where machine 1 is? And how would that affect the bottleneck? I have no idea. It might clear in time. In theory, I feel like it's somewhat makes sense. In practicality, I'm sure it all works out fine. And I'm overthinking the build here, but luckily when I was designing this, that was not a thought that I had. That was actually a thought that I'm coming up more or less right now. I only had a slight thought of, well, things might back up, but it will probably all work out. And that's kind of just what I'm going with, is I'm sure it's all going to work out. It's all going to be fine. My only thing when I was blueprinting this is I need to make sure that all the belts are down, because I couldn't get it to blueprint the inserters and the belts if some of the belt was already down. It was either none of the belt had to be down or all of the belt had to be down. I can't find a way to blueprint it with only part of the belt down. So I'm like, well, I want to blueprint it all in one go, or as in as few blueprints as possible. And so this is what I did. Of course, you can probably get away with doing half the blueprint, so the bottom 2 inserters, then the top inserters with the belt, and do it that way. I didn't. I just decided, you know what, let's just place all the belt. It is going to take me like probably like a minute, 2 minutes to put it all down, but I'm okay with that. It is nice to be able to prototype a lot of these builds in pretty much real time and not have to worry about things being crafted or even worry about my robots. Like, I look back at some of the earlier episodes and just am like shocked at how slow our robots move. I think the fact that how slow they move, but also how few we had, I was like, wow. And so this is where you see me putting down some of these compressors. So the math that I came up with is, so we need 210 per side, and then we need to break them into intervals of 30, 60, 60, 60 to get 210 per side. And that was based purely on the math that I have to put compressors to compress the belt every 60 machines, so that way we could stack the amount needed. Now, worst case, if this doesn't end up working how I'm hoping it will work, I'll run four vertical belts, so all on top of each other, and then I'll compress them all down at basically the storage side of things, and then that way I don't have to worry about any sort of like weird throughput things, and everything should just mostly work out for itself. Let's see. I'm just trying to go back through and look at my notes that I had for this episode to see if there was anything else. A couple things that I did have to do is to put in some landfill, because I was realizing that this build was going to get quite long quite quickly. I don't even remember how far it's going to end up going, but as you can see, it gets quite far. I think I ended up actually splitting how far it went, purely based on that I wasn't going to be able to put 210 machines in a row. So this was 30. And so of course I lined everything up and was like, okay, so there's 60. Lined that one up, so there's 90. And I was like, okay, we have to put in space for that compressor. So there was 120, and I'm like, holy cow, this is a little over half the planet at this point. And we still had another 90 of these to go, or another 3 blueprints, and I'm like, I think we're gonna break it up. And so right now that's what I was doing. That's why I'm currently not moving around, is I was doing the napkin math. I was like, okay, so how much can we put where to make sure things still function? And I was like, okay, it looks like we're gonna have to move some things around. And that's what I ended up doing. Alright. Well, I think with that, we're going to call it here. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys did, you guys know what to do. Smash that like button if you learned something. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns for me, leave those down below. And as always, consider subscribing, as it does help with the channel. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one. Peace out.